Doesn't mean I'll be good at it. We'll see.
Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Thanks so much for being here with us on this Friday afternoon. It's feeling very summery here in Southern California. I hope it's feeling nice and summery where you are. Well, it's a very summery week at the 4th of July and all that. But before we start, I got to tell you a little bit. Well, first of all, I'll let you know who's on the program today, and you can dial if you'd like to call in. Second hour, Michael Lofton will be here, and we're going to talk about heresy. What is heresy? But we'll also talk about some of the associated words, because a lot of now that there's Twitter and all the other things, people accuse each other of heresy, apostasy, dissent, and there's a whole collection of words there. We're going to dig into second hour and then let you ask questions. You can call up and ask, is my bishop a heretic? He said the following. And then please name your bishop, and we'll, well, no, let's not do it that way, but we'll talk about those things. This first hour, we're going to talk with someone who we're just happy to welcome to the show, Father Michael Ranier, and we're going to talk about common courtesy. It's actually quite an important thing for a Christian person and for any person to consider common courtesy, particularly now that we have Twitter and all the things. So give a call, 888-318-7884. But I have to give an important official report that Edgar is married. Our call screener, who's also our podcast producer, Edgar. We were all of us that are here in this booth right now, we were all at the wedding last night. And lots of Catholic Answers folks were there, lots of other folks there. It was a beautiful wedding, and it had, because of the bride, it had Gaelic elements. Because of the groom, it had Mexican elements, some of which I had to read about later because I did not know there was a lasso involved in a Mexican wedding. Did you know that, Darren? Were you?
Yeah.
Oh, you've seen the lasso before? The 13 coins? I didn't know about that. I loved that they put the bouquet at the feet of the Virgin, and it was beautiful. I thought it was a beautiful wedding. Did you think it was a beautiful wedding?
Yeah, it was fantastic.
I did notice that you and your wife, Rena, refused to sit with Missy, my wife, and I. I don't know what that was about, but whatever.
Nothing personal, man.
Because I've never seen you, Darren, look so dapper. You looked as sharp as you have ever looked. You were dressed to the nines for that wedding.
Thank you.
Yeah, you looked really good. But we had a really, really good time. So please pray for Edgar and Lena. Thomas will be screening the calls. And then when they get back, we'll ask them, we'll have them in the studio and ask them about how married life is going and what that lasso was about and all of that. I've never been to a wedding with a lasso and a bagpiper. That was the first time. Quite a combination. 888-318-7884, the number. Father Michael Ranier is our guest. He's a graduate of Yale Divinity School, and he lives in St. Louis, Missouri with his wife and 5 children. That's because he's an ordained Catholic priest through the Pastoral provision for former Episcopal clergymen. That provision was created by Pope St. John Paul II. He's also a contributing editor at Dappled Things, a wonderful journal dedicated to the written and visual expressions. And he's the author of a new book, The Forgotten Language, How Recovering the Poetics of the Mass Will Change Our Lives. But he's here to talk to us about an article he wrote. He has a column in Aleteia at aleteia.com, the Catholic website, and he wrote a beautiful one on common courtesy. So let me try a little bit of courtesy. Father Michael Rainier, welcome.
Thank you, Si. Thanks for having me.
One of the things that you point out in this piece is one of the reasons maybe people aren't as polite, we're failing at common courtesy, is that it's not very efficient, and we've become kind of obsessed with efficiency.
Right. Courtesy takes time. And I think we've all convinced ourselves that we are running out of time, and so we don't have the time for these things, right? So you see how the smartphone and email and these things really speed up our communications. So I'll get these texts from my mom. Hopefully she's not listening. I'll get texts from my mom, and my mom will just text me and says, I need you to be here tomorrow at 3. And that's what the text will say, right? And you read that and you think, oh, yeah, she could have said please and thank you. But I know my mom. I love my mom. I know my mom loves me. So it's simply a shorthand communication. But if it's someone that I don't know as well, please and thank you goes a long way, right? Taking the time to spell out some of these common sort of introductory phrases, asking how people are doing. I think it's worth the time. And in fact, I would argue that we don't have the time to not be courteous, because these are our lives, and we're here to know each other and to love each other and to spend time with each other. And so if we're just rushing around trying to accomplish things, we're really missing the point.
888-318-7884. Is it you connect this also with our Christianity, however, that there's a connection between common courtesy and the general vocation to charity as a Christian.
Right. So courtesy, and I'll admit right now, I'm very introverted. I'm the Platonic form of the melancholic temperament. So I really don't like small talk. I despise it to the core of my being.
Sorry for all that talk about the wedding there at the beginning. I apologize for all that.
Well, I was explaining before we came on the air that I'm in and out pretty quick at the weddings, because that's exactly what I struggle with as an introverted person, is working a room and all the little things. And it's not that they're not really beautiful things, celebrating a marriage and all the customs and traditions. But for me, it's always hard. So I don't really like to talk about how the sports team is doing, or how the weather was today, or one of my little pet peeves. And I know people are just being nice, so I don't get mad. But they'll say, I hope this email finds you well. They're just being nice. And I always want to write back, they always find me well. I'm always good. But what I've learned over the years is that it's not a good thing that I struggle with those common courtesies, and they really have a role in our lives. They might seem frivolous or unnecessary, but really what they're doing is they are allowing us, especially if we don't know each other very well, through small talk to kind of feel each other out in a safe way, and just wait to see what connection we can make, and then we can move into something more fruitful in terms of discussion and making a fruitful, strong connection. But we can't just get there without the common courtesy and putting in the work together. And so what common courtesy really functions as is really a simple and almost unstated way of saying, look, I'm glad that you exist. I acknowledge that you have value as a person, and I want to get to know you. And I'm glad I'm sharing this earth with you. And if I can show that in just a little way, by asking you if you're doing well, or holding the door open for you, as we're walking into the store, then I'm happy to do that. And I need to be happy to do that.
It's increasingly difficult to do it, though, because when courtesies aren't shared, they become kind of I don't know. I guess it becomes disheartening to continue to be courteous in a world where the habit of courtesy is often missing.
Right, and this gets, I think, to like a very distilled sort of message from our Lord, which is, look, well, just be nice to people, even if they're not nice to you. That's actually where the virtue lies. So it's very easy for me to be nice if I like you, and to take time out of my day to assist you or do a favor for you if I like you, because you've been nice to me, or I have some hope that in the future you'll return the favor to me. But the real virtue of courtesy is when we can be courteous to people who either we don't like, or they've made clear they don't like us, or we simply don't know them, and there's really no chance for them to reciprocate. So I think that's why it's a very small thing, but it is a very Christian action.
Again, we're talking about common courtesy with Father Michael Rainier. You're welcome to call 888-318-7884. It does seem to me that it gets harder. I noticed, like, for even simple things like the grocery store checkout line, which is a brilliant modern invention. I mean, how did we survive thousands of years on this planet without the grocery store checkout line? But often the courtesy is strained because the person at the front of the line is having trouble getting their card to work, or they've decided to write a check and they've got to balance the checkbook before there's. So what ends up happening is, in modern society, it's a society of lines. It's a society in which, if you're not efficient up at the front, if you're chatting, the two of you, and enjoying these courtesies, you're holding me up.
Oh, I see. So you're arguing it's impossible to be courteous to all the customers in the store in that scenario, right?
It becomes kind of well, I'll tell you what it becomes like for me. If I'm in a terrible hurry and the checkout person is being courteous to the other, and they're having how's your day, and it's perfectly normal, I have to remind myself to be a human being about this and not be a fanatic for efficiency, or else I'll get annoyed at people who are doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Right. Yeah. So with this particular virtue, as with so many virtues, we're fighting, I think, the way that our society is trying to form and shape us, and, to be really blunt about it, dehumanize us.
Right.
Yes. Right. So everything in the way that our daily lives unfolds tends to be very dehumanizing. We're waiting in lines. We're getting stuff done. We're checking stuff off our checklist. We're being productive. We're making money. We're doing everything fast, and that's really not healthy. But because it's all around us, it becomes normalized, and we think that's what we're supposed to do. That's what we're supposed to be like. And so I think that what we need to do is take a step back, be reflective about it, and ask ourselves, what is the point, right? Like, what am I doing today? Is it just to get through the checkout line as fast as possible, or is it to maybe make someone's day a little nicer? I won't do this because I'm introverted. I'm terrified of things like this, but I have these extroverted friends, and I'll walk with them maybe down Main Street, or when shopping malls existed. I'm old enough to remember when indoor
remember
shopping.
Those days?
What's that?
Remember those days?
Yeah, right. It was brilliant. You go and you'd walk around and you look at people, and I'd have these extroverted friends, and they would just see strangers and say, "Hey, that's a nice shirt," and the person would just smile, and you could tell, like, my friend had just said one thing in passing,
Mm-hmm.
and it had made that person's day. And I think it's like such low-hanging fruit just to be kind to people and to be courteous, that I don't know why we're so bad at it.
Well, I want to talk a little bit when we come back about that dehumanizing aspect, because this is one way of maintaining your humanity and other people's humanity. And I love that you use that word, of the dehumanizing qualities of modern life. But let's talk about that when we come back. We have to take a quick break. Our guest is Father Michael Rainier. We're talking about common courtesy and your life as a Christian and as a human being. 888-318-7884.
Catch Catholic Answers live anytime at Catholic.com. Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
This is Conversations with Consequences, where we delve deeper into issues affecting our church, our country, and our core, the family.
As Catholics, we need to be informed, aware, and able to talk through some of the tough topics that we're facing in our culture and in our world. Conversations with Consequences gives us the tools to do so.
It's not enough to pray. We have to be a light for the world.
Conversations with Consequences, tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Wonderful article. I really enjoyed it in Aleteia by our guest, Father Michael Rainier, about common courtesy, about the importance of common courtesy, and pointing out some of the reasons why we may be losing the courtesies that we once had, and also why we might even become convinced that some of them are useless and pointless and worthless. But we're deceiving ourselves when we say that they're anything but useless or pointless. If you'd like to talk about common courtesy, 888-318-7884. I promise to be courteous to you. Before I go back to the phones and chatting with Father Rainier, I want to let you know there's 4 days left in our flash sale. We wanted to kind of, and I don't know where we are, but I know we're getting nearer and nearer to being full for our big pilgrimage to Rome. So it's $300 off every ticket, whether you get the air included or not. Lots of people are going for the land only, I think because the flights are very cheap right now. And so you can go for the land only or the one that includes, that doesn't matter, $300 off until the 11th of this month. And then we're going to try to close the books on this. We're only taking 50 people going to Rome. I'm going. Joe Heschmeyer is going. Chris Check is going. It's the Flannel Panel pilgrimage to Rome. We'll do the show at least once from Rome, a recorded version to play to play later, because it'll be the middle of the night if we try to do it live. But we're going to stay downtown in the historic center of Rome. I say downtown. Chris makes fun of me when I say downtown Rome. But and we're going to visit all the most magnificent Catholic sites, probably at least a dozen, maybe 20 that you normally won't visit on a pilgrimage, even a very well-run Catholic pilgrimage. So if you want to come with us, go to CatholicAnswersPilgrimage.com. It's $300 off each ticket until the 11th of this month, and then I think we will be done. CatholicAnswersPilgrimage.com. As I said, our guest is Father Michael Rainier. We're talking about common courtesy, and this is part of what you used the word dehumanizing before, Father, and this is one of the things that I really liked about your article in Aleteia, and that's a regular column for you, right?
Right. Every Sunday I have one.
Every Sunday you put a column out. All right, Sunday is a big day for you then.
It is. Yeah.
So the idea that the more efficient, in some ways you say in the article, and I think you actually have this sentence: the more efficient we become, the less we accomplish. But that depends on what it is we think we're trying to accomplish in this life.
Right. So one of my personal goals is to accomplish far less and to not be very efficient. Because when I was younger, I was obsessed with acquiring intellectual knowledge, and I was very, very efficient. I prided myself on, okay, I'm going to take 21 credit hours, then I'm going to audit, I'm going to read books, I'm going to be very efficient, I'm going to work hard, I'm going to accomplish it. And I was in the midst of this is probably not the time to unpack all this, but in a crisis of faith and trying to work my way through it. But the mistake I was making was to think that through productivity and through efficiency and through the acquiring of certain goods that I valued very highly, that I could find my vocation and rediscover, I think, something. As I said earlier, I'm melancholic, so I put everything in these grandiose terms, right? Welcome to my existential crisis here. I was trying to, find like the purpose of my humanity, right? What am I here on this earth to do or to be? And so often we think, well, it's to accomplish a certain thing. I'll get this academic degree and then I'll be happy. I will get this job and make this amount of money and then I'll be happy. I will acquire these things. I'll get myself a wife and a good house and then I'll be happy. But that's really the wrong way of looking at our lives, because we're really here to simply be and to exist and to flourish as human beings and to know God and to know each other. And part of that, one little part of it, maybe at a very superficial level, but still very important, is this idea of courtesy, that we have the time to slow down and appreciate this journey through life that we're taking together, because we don't have to accomplish all these things that we have convinced ourselves that we have to accomplish, because in the end they're meaningless and they don't make us any more happy. And so it's okay to slow down and quote unquote accomplish less.
This is one of the wonderful things I think about your thinking on this. This, to me, is the heart of the matter, that the more we are convinced that that efficiency is the highest value, the more we are being talked out of our own humanity. And then we're losing our lives. We're gaining everything but losing our souls. I mean, that just exactly as Christ said it. The soul requires these courtesies, these patiences, these salutations that we share with one another in order to thrive, and we deprive ourselves of them at the cost of our souls.
Right. Yeah, I think it's very important. It even kind of affects the way that we participate in the holy sacrifice of the Mass, right? If we start to think, well, the courtesies, these extra things, they're dispensable. We are here for a specific accomplishment. I want to be fed with a certain, I'm waiting to hear that certain thing that Father's going to say in the homily that will change my life and help me. Or I'm waiting for that song, hopefully to be sung that I love, that gets an emotional reaction inside.
Yeah.
I'm here because I want this grace, and I want to take it and acquire it, right? And I want it to be mine. And so we start to think of the Mass as something that we want to get through it efficiently. And you even hear Catholics talk about it that way. They'll say, well, look, it's valid. The Eucharist is valid. You might not like the songs, or you might not like that we've gotten rid of incense and chant and whatever, that the priest used the shortest prayer and he raced through it a little bit. Yeah, it's not perfect, but it's valid, so it's fine. Well, in my opinion, it's not fine at all, right? Because we've dropped that courtesy, if you will, towards God. We are refusing to spend time with him because we think that some of those extras are unnecessary. So on Sunday, when I say a Mass, the main principal Mass at Sunday at my parish, Epiphany of Our Lord, where I'm the pastor right now in St. Louis, I chant it. I sing it all. It takes a little bit longer. I use Eucharistic Prayer 1. It's a little bit longer. We use incense. That adds a little bit to it. It's not that the Mass gets super long. Someone did tell me it was an hour and 5 minutes once, and that was too long. And I didn't have the heart to tell her about the Easter Vigil, but
or about Mass in the entire continent of Africa, where
right.
Longer. Like, get over it, American.
That's it. Yeah. So we have the time to slow down and pray with some of these extras. They are important. So it's important at prayer, and it's important when we are simply spending time with each other.
We got a bunch of calls for you, Father. Shall we take some calls?
Sure, as long as the questions aren't hard.
Let me read ahead. I'll eliminate all the
Yeah,
hard
yeah,
questions.
pre-screen them for me.
Father Michael Rainier, our guest. Nuala starts us off in Battle Creek, Michigan, listening on 89.7 FM. Nuala, thank you very much for your call. Go ahead with your question for Father Rainier.
Okay, hi, Father. It isn't actually a question. It's more of a comment. I didn't think this way when I was in my 30s and not even in my 40s, but now I'm almost 63, so I have changed my thinking and it has improved. In the Bible, Jesus tells us a couple of things: love God above everything else. I'm paraphrasing. It's not the exact phrasing. And then love your neighbor as yourself. And then one more big one: love others as I have loved you.
Amen.
And these are really, important things. And I think about how would Jesus act in various situations, because that's part of the answer to love others as I have loved you, Jesus saying that. And that's how I view common courtesy, as an opportunity to show someone else a piece or a sliver of the pie of Christ's love. And I might not show them the whole thing. They might not have a lot of contact with me. But every once in a while, there's a person that over time I have had, been able to talk more spiritually with them about things. But that's how I view things, and it's pretty easy when you look at it like that.
Father.
Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful way of phrasing it, right? So our Lord says, if you give one of these little ones a glass of water, you've given it to me. And so when we have those little interactions, yeah, you can make connections sometimes that become something more, but sometimes they're very fleeting. But the real point there is that you have loved Christ. It's not even necessarily about that person, but it's about the fact you're loving Christ in them. And then also you're allowing Christ within you to be loved as well. So you're allowing him to love through you. And so I think that's a really beautiful thing. Thanks for sharing.
Nuala, thank you very, very much. We'll be right back with more. I want to continue that point that Nuala made, though. What a wonderful point about manners as being the way, or courtesies as being the way that we love as Christ loved. 888-318-7884, the number, right back after this. Want to get right to the core of Christ's saving message? Want a roadmap for living the life Christ calls you to? It's time to look again at the Beatitudes. In his new book, Heart of the Gospel, How the Beatitudes Show Us God's Plan for Happiness, Father Sebastian Walsh demonstrates compellingly how these 8 declarations make up the foundation, the essence, and the final goal of Jesus' teaching. Heart of the Gospel illuminates the scriptural passages from which we get the Beatitudes, explains the significance of their wording, their order, and their timing in Jesus' ministry. And it draws out edifying parallels and connections with salvation history in the lives of the saints. Most importantly, Father Walsh offers wise counsel from his own work as a priest and teacher to help you live the Beatitudes in your own life. Order your copy of Heart of the Gospel today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity. In the early church was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com. Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. I guess I just wanted to follow up what Nuala said. Her point was wonderfully made, Father Michael Rainier, our guest. We're talking about common courtesy. But I wonder, is it possible to be a disciple of Christ and to live the way Christ called us to live and to not be a person of courtesy?
I think that would be a real struggle, right? Because we're called to love, right? We all think, oh, we love each other, right? Well, that's easy to say in the abstract. It's very easy to love humanity. I think I'm ripping this off from G.K. Chesterton and quoting him very badly, but I think he said something along these lines.
He ripped it off from somebody else.
That's right. It's fine. Yeah, it's easy to love
Cardinal Newman.
So it's easy to love humanity. It's difficult to love this man, right? This person in front of me.
Yeah.
And that's what courtesy is that virtue of acknowledging this specific person that God has placed in my path at this moment, even if it's just a passing interaction.
Lots of calls for you, Father. I'm going to keep going back to the phones.
Sure.
Nick's in Pennsylvania listening on Holy Name Radio. Nick, thank you for the call. Go ahead with your question for Father Michael Rainier.
Oh, thank you for taking the question. Courtesy is a subject near and dear to my heart, and I wondered if some settings lend themselves to courtesy more than others. I work in the Capitol, so it's a slightly more relaxed, less cutthroat pace than private industry. It seems to me that people are more likely to say hello in the hallway. Would that be true of your own experience?
Oh, in terms of it being easier in some contexts to be courteous, sure. Yeah. I think if you're and this goes back to that idea of, is our society or is our culture supporting us, or is it more like a headwind that we're moving into? Certainly for me personally, yeah, it's if everyone around me is being nice, it's easier for me to be nice, right? And so that might be one of these little gifts that we can give to the world as Catholic Christians, is to be stubbornly courteous, regardless of the situation we find ourselves in. And then you never know how someone else will react or what ice that might break.
What do you think, Nick?
Oh, yes. I mean, besides my paycheck and benefits, some of the people I've been blessed to get to know over the years are part of the wonderful things where I work. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your show.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks very much. But that's the thing is, I suppose the relentless pursuit of money is going to mitigate against courtesy. It's going to mitigate against all kinds of things. But the relentless pursuit of money is a mistake. I think that's pretty clear that's what the Lord is teaching us. That's not going to work, and you're not going to get what you want doing that.
Right. It almost turns, I would think, if you're in one of these big corporations and you're on this team of people, and then you're all trying to get ahead, right? Doesn't that then turn your coworkers almost into your enemies?
Yeah.
Because you're trying to overcome them and get ahead, make them look bad and make you look good. So why in the world would you be courteous unless you're playing some angle?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And there is the stereotype of the Christian as creepy courteous, because underneath there's this kind of judgmental hostility. But that, I think, is a stereotype it's a very cynical stereotype meant to make people feel uncomfortable with courtesy, I think. The movie stereotype of the sweet Christian who's really gross and judgy underneath.
Right. That's never been my experience. I mean, my own temptation, and maybe I think a more common issue with Catholics or Christians and courtesy, is that it becomes a little bit salesman-like. So we're being courteous because we really desperately want you to come to church with us, right?
Oh,
and so,
yeah.
Right, the motivation's very good. It's very pure, but it may be a little bit off track, right? Yeah, I think courtesy is just simply practiced for its own sake because we're happy that that person's there.
I wonder, because I don't see this as a divide between the old and the young. I don't have the feeling, and I don't think this is what you're saying, Father, that, oh, young people today, they're so, because there's lovely young people and there's old people who clearly just never got the memo that what human life is supposed to be about. But I do think that there's a society-wide, whether it's the old or the young or the in-between, loss, which has something to do with us interacting with machines more than we do with people. And it seems to me this was part of your essay as well, that the interactions with machines, they undermine our habits, our courteous habits.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's pretty obvious that smartphones and email and those sorts of things have really destroyed our ability to have genuine face-to-face interactions.
I'm one of those people who I'm so slow to think of the implications of the gospel. I'm ashamed of it sometimes. But I mean, I had a degree in theology before it consciously occurred to me one day that the gospel still applied while I was driving a car. I had to have the conscious realization, like, oh, the gospel's still active. It's not like you get in a car and there's a different gospel that you live by. I think I also had to have a similar realization one day speaking with a customer service person who was frustrating and annoying on the phone, realizing I'm not dealing with a phone. That's the medium. I'm dealing with a person, and I don't get excused from the gospel just because they're far away.
Yeah, absolutely. You can even hear it in the language we use. We'll say, oh, a car had an accident.
Yeah.
Well, no, a person in a car got into an accident, right? There's a person in the car.
Yeah.
There's a person at the other end of that email that you fired off because when you were frustrated, right?
Right.
And so it's always incredibly helpful to take a step back and realize we are all human beings navigating this world, and the technology doesn't change that.
Yeah, but it does change our perception of it.
Right. So if we're struggling with that perception, my recommendation, this is what I had to do for me, so I'm preaching to myself, is just use it less. All right. So It's funny you brought up the example of the car. I just try not to drive anymore. And I know that sounds extreme. If I have to go to a place, sure, I get in my car and go. But for my regular little commutes and things, I literally just get on my bicycle and commute. And because I find that I'm so much happier. Or with my phone, I just don't really have conversations via text on my phone. So you can text me, sure, and I might respond if you need something. But if we want to talk and simply just have a nice conversation, I want to have a cup of coffee with you and take the time with you because I want to see your interactions and respond to what you're saying. And the texting and the technology gets in the way of it. And as you said, it shifts our perceptions. And so all the courtesies dissipate, and then all the authentic, more deeply held interactions also dissipate because they never have a chance to become established.
Father Michael Rainier, our guest, we're talking about common courtesy. There's a lot of folks on the phone, so I'm going to just keep going back to the phones, Father. I'm going to go to Texas. Michael's in Texas listening to EWTN on Channel 130, Sirius XM satellite radio. Michael, thank you for your call. Go ahead with your question for Father Michael Rainier.
Hi, Father. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. I want you to know this isn't from Texas. This is from the Midwest because I lived in Michigan, Indiana, and Illinois. So I grew up with common courtesy. And there happened to be a lady today at Costco that looked like she might need some help putting this big old bag into her trunk. And so I asked her if she would like some help, and sure enough, she did. And then something else I do on a regular basis is when I go by people, I say, how are you? And they say, fine. And if they say, how are you? I'll say, I'm blessed. I hope you are. And that really has gotten me several big thank yous for saying that because they needed it at that time. So anyways, that's what I do. So thank you.
Yeah, that's great, Michael. Can I ask, did the woman at Costco, did her demeanor change, or did you have any follow up after you helped her?
Oh, sure. A big smile came on her face, and I asked her if she has help at home, and she said, yeah, she does. And so anyway, yeah, she was very happy, and she took care of my dog while I was putting the bag into her trunk. So, yeah.
That's not to me. That's so beautiful, Michael. There's humanity in a moment that could have been missed.
Yes, and yes, I do that quite frequently if I see someone that looks like they need help.
Yeah.
If they're at the checkout and they got a lot of groceries and they're elderly, I'll ask if they need help out in the car and do what I'm supposed to be doing. So,
if I may, Michael, I just want to ask about the subtext of something you said. Were you implying at the beginning of your call that they have better manners in the Midwest than Texas?
I'm going to take the fifth.
Well, because I come from Southern California, and the people from Texas seem like they have the best manners in the world.
I'll answer for Michael. The answer is yes.
They do. All right, so we must be awful here in California then. It must be the worst. All right, Michael, thanks. We got to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more conversation about common courtesy with Father Michael Rainier right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
This is Archbishop Paul Coakley, the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend, a coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul, and that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come? At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
EWTN, helping people grow in their love and understanding of God.
I'm a convert, and I was received into the church when I was a junior in college. Recently, I've sort of had a reconversion where I've come back into the faith, I think, stronger than I've ever had it. When I heard this radio program today, it took me back to that moment, and it was so powerful for me that it really led me to where I am today.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. How nice our previous caller was, Michael. But I do have to say this, Father Rainier. Catholic Answers Live is supported by donors, and the biggest donor state we have of all 50 states in the United States is Texas. So I have to defend Texas. Texas gets 100% of my support. So right. I don't know what the experience of Midwesterners is in Texas, but as far as I'm concerned, it's the greatest of all 50 states because it's currently paying my salary.
Texas is the best.
Thank you, Father, for joining in. I appreciate that. 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. We're talking about common courtesy. Our guest is Father Michael Rainier. And Father is a Catholic priest, former Anglican, Episcopal clergyman. Is there a difference? Should I say Episcopal, not Anglican?
It's way too long to explain the difference.
Oh, but
there is a difference. I went to
Okay.
an Episcopalian seminary, and then I was an Anglican priest. They're related, but not quite the same.
I gotcha. But now a priest of the Catholic Church, as well as the father of 5 children and a husband. And he's the author of a new book called The Forgotten Language, How Recovering the Poetics of the Mass Will Change Our Lives. It's from Ignatius Press, right?
It's from Sophia.
Sophia. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. But I don't know why I'm sorry. It's a very fine press, Sophia.
Yeah, I'm happy with it.
888-318-7884. Father also writes for Aletheia, where he wrote a beautiful piece on common courtesy and our humanity and our Christianity. And if you'd like to talk about common courtesy, give us a call, 888-318-7884. And if you're from Texas, you go to the top of the line. Colin in Des Moines, Iowa, listening on Iowa Catholic Radio, where they are actually nice in Iowa. They have this thing called Iowa Nice, and then you go there and they are freakishly nice. Colin, I'm so glad you're here. Go ahead with your question for Father. Oh, hang on. I'm having trouble with my phones. Go ahead, Colin.
Good evening, Mr. Keller. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you.
All right. I really like this conversation and this topic. There's a guy named Neil Postman in the 70s and 80s who talked a lot about how technology influences our behavior. And so my question kind of is related to his obsession with like print versus screens. Why do you think courtesy flourished in a print world but does not flourish in a screen-based world? Like people would like sit on the train and read the newspaper like they sit on the train and scroll their phones. So the behaviors are kind of the same, but the outcomes are very different. So I was wondering if you could talk about that, and I'm going to hang up and listen now.
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm. I have thoughts on this. I've actually written, I think, a few essays over at Dappled Things magazine on the difference between the printed word and the word on the screen. And psychologically, what happens is the internet, when we read and we take in and consume content on the internet, it literally rewires our brains, particularly because of the hyperlinks. So the internet trains us to skip around. So a lot of people will talk about how they fall into like a rabbit hole on YouTube or through Wikipedia, and they start clicking on links and clicking on links and going and going and going. And before they know it, they've wasted 2 hours. But they haven't really deeply engaged with whatever the topic is. They've just kind of flitted along the surface out of curiosity. Whereas the printed word rewards sustained attention and concentration. And then when you add in smartphones and social media and the scrolling, especially the infinite scrolling feature, and you'll watch people, and I call it doom scrolling, and they sit there and you just see their finger and they're moving. They're not ever really stopping to engage any of the content, but they can't seem to halt the process of seeing, well, if I scroll down one more time, maybe something great will appear that will intrigue me. It's almost like you're playing the slots. You're being trained psychologically, like at the slot machines at the casino. I'll just do one more pull, and maybe I'll get rewarded. And I think that probably filters into our ability to focus in personal conversations as well. So I had noticed with myself, I would be talking to someone, and even just 5 minutes, and my hand would start to shake almost. I'd want to pull my phone out and just see. Right? Did someone text me, or did a new email hit my inbox? And someone would be talking to me. It was so rude. And that's when I realized I have to disconnect drastically from this technology, because it's destroying my ability to interact with human beings. And the printed word doesn't do that. The printed word actually opens up your imagination. And it's very easy then to move from the printed word into an authentic, real life discussion.
Colin, thank you so much for the question. It's something we really do have to think deeply about. And Father, thank you for your comments, because everybody knows we're losing our attention span. Well, courtesy, humanity requires an attention span. You have to be able to attend to the other person. Right. Everybody knows we're less patient than we had been previously. We're more depressed than we were because of these machines. It seems to me like that Thomas Aquinas, at least my understanding of Aquinas is, if you've got a vice, one of the ways to defeat a vice is just work on the opposite virtue. And maybe instead of focusing so much on putting down the machines, we should focus on, every day, am I spending time listening to an actual physical person? Am I interacting with them? Am I trying to enjoy the interaction and make it enjoyable for them? Right. If I can do those things, I'll build up the muscles and become better at it. I want to stop chatting though, because there's a lot of people who want to talk to you about this. I'm so glad that there are people who want to talk about this. Joey in Gregory, Michigan. I think it's Gregory, Michigan, listening to EWTN on channel 130, Sirius XM satellite radio. Joey, thank you very much for the call. Go ahead with your comment or question for Father.
Thank you. I'm a Catholic guy that wears his that wears his Catholicism on his sleeve. I got 7 children, but I've been in car sales for about 14 years, and the communication that we have with the guys it's super comical, but everybody's like jumping over one another to get a customer. Everybody's in competition with one another. I get 70% of the people of my sales because all these guys, 80% of the time have got their heads down, just going through Instagram on their phone, or I can't stand the stuff. So it's benefiting me in a way, but I can see where the communication's real good with the customers, and I have a great time with them. But it seems like the more that we do, the more competitive that we are, because you're only good as your next sale or the next call that you take, and it's to me it's discourteous, right? We're discourteous to each other because we're trying to provide for our families, because we want to get to the next one. But then when stuff slows down, we communicate well. But I don't know. I think it's because of the job that I'm in, that when I come home, it's like the quarters almost flip, because we all pray as a family. We say the rosary together. We haven't missed church on Sunday ever, sometimes going during the week. And I feel like I'm in kind of a conundrum with that, but I don't know. And that's it.
Father, what do you say?
Yeah, that's really difficult, right? Because we have to, at some point, go over the threshold of our home. And it sounds like, Joey, you built a really beautiful home and a domestic life for your family, and they'll benefit from that. But at some point, you have to step over the threshold and go into the world. And unfortunately, we have to make some money, because we have to keep that home and to feed our children. And that takes us to places sometimes where we're in very stressful work environments, and it's very difficult to be courteous. I remember I used to be a waiter. I waited tables at IHOP, the International House of Pancakes, and that's what I did in college. And it was lower stakes, but of course the waiters are all stressed out and fighting over tables as well, because every table represents extra money that we can earn. And so there would be these times when we would treat each other really in inappropriate ways, right? And I think it was the stress of it that we were allowing to get to us. And when I look back on it, I think, I can't believe I acted in some of those ways. I should have been courteous, even when it disadvantaged me in that scenario. And I know that's a very difficult thing to say. And if you're a father of 7 and you're talking about selling a car, I know that's a big deal. That could be a big chunk of salary for a week, not just losing out on a tip from one single table at a restaurant. But I think that's something that we have to think long and hard about in our own context. How can I be courteous, and how can I be proud of how I behaved that day when I get home, and know that I behaved with integrity and courtesy?
I'm
Sure.
sorry, Father. I just wanted to add that many Catholics are employers as well, and in that case, we have to think about, you could have a market-based efficiency that pits your employees against one another, but are you really being a Christ-like employer if you do that?
Right. Yeah, we have to think about these things at a very deep structural level, because we're trying to live a Christian life. Not simply be Christians for an hour at night when we're home with our family, or for that hour when we're at Mass, but we're trying to redeem, and this is our Lord's goal, is to redeem all of creation, which means every aspect of life, how we interact with each other at our jobs, and when we're out and about, and so on. And so if we're in a position to influence that for the better, I think that's our responsibility.
Father Michael Rainier is our guest, and he has a new book out about the Mass, and you should check it out. It's called The Forgotten Language: How Recovering the Poetics of the Mass Will Change Our Lives. We're talking to him today, however, about common courtesy, and I'm just delighted by the conversation, because there is a way in which Oftentimes people will tell me about capitalism, about the free markets and all that, and I'm not a great economist or anything like that, but they'll say about all of its achievements, but some of its achievements do come at a cost. And the fact that what if you could create a perfectly efficient market, or even a very highly efficient market? Would that necessarily be a good society for people to inhabit? Well, when you hear what someone like Joey just said, or others who have called today, or we talk about the line even at the grocery store, the line to get your Diet Coke at McDonald's, where you're actually constantly in competition with all those around you, is that a society that is good, or is that just a society that's efficient, Father?
Yeah, that's really hard to untangle. Exactly what are the costs and the benefits of the particular economic system where we find ourselves in, the particular social system, political system. And so we have to use our prudence and be really thoughtful about it, because it's so easy just to go with the flow and just assume, okay, this is what we do. This is what's normal. This is what's good by default. And yeah, there might be a lot of good to it, but maybe it could be even a little bit better. Right? If we as Catholics live as Catholics in the midst of whatever circumstances that we find ourselves in.
Aletheia is the website if you'd like to look up Father Michael Rainier's work published each Sunday. Father, I'm so grateful that you agreed to come on. I hope you'll come on again. And would you mind giving us and our listeners your blessing before you go?
I'd be happy to. Dominus vobiscum.
Et cum spiritu tuo.
There you go. Benedicat vos omnipotens Deus Pater et Filius et Spiritus Sanctus.
Amen. Hey, give me a little warning if we're going to do it in Latin, will you? I mean, I'm a very low-class guy. Don't.
Very mysterious.
Father Michael Rainier, our guest. Coming up, we're going to talk about what is heresy, what is schism, what's apostasy, what's dissent, all these words that we throw at each other on the internet. Michael Lofton will be here to help us do that right after this on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, still recovering from the terror of having to do Latin all of a sudden. Can you, Darren, could you maybe on whatever emails we send priests when we invite them on, tell them don't just go straight into Latin on me without some warning. That panicked me, Darren. So I have high blood pressure now. I can't. I was hyperventilating. All right, well, it's good. Good thing we got Michael Lofton here. He could go right into Latin. He could go right into Greek. He doesn't care. Whatever language. He's not like me. Michael Lofton, of course, the proprietor. He's the founder. He's the proprietor. He's the host of Reason and Theology, which you can find on YouTube or at reasonandtheology.com. What's it about? Well, uncovering the beauties of the faith, sharing the beauties of the faith, and also I think a great service it does is clearing up a lot of confusion about the faith, because there's a lot of confusion. So do check it out at reasonandtheology.com. Michael Lofton, thanks very much for being here with us.
Hey, Cy. Thanks for having me back.
How is your Latin? Is it pretty...
It's okay. I've taken a few years of it, but, not where I want to be, but it's all right.
I bet that means you're so good at it. I mean,
not really. I mean, I can kind of make my way through a theological text, but I want to get to the point where I can do some, good translation work.
And do you know any Latin swear words? You don't. You can't say them on the air. I just wondered, do you know any Latin swear words?
No, unfortunately, they don't really come up in the Latin Vulgate or.
They do when I'm studying.
Yeah, is that right?
They don't come up because you don't ask. You know what? You have not because you ask not. That's
right?
Your problem. Yeah. 888-318-7884. 888-318-7884. Here's what we're going to talk about with Michael. We're accusatory with one another on the internet these days, we Catholics, and we say this bishop is a heretic, that bishop is an apostate, this podcaster over here is in dissent, and that podcast over there is fomenting schism. And are we using those words correctly? That's what we have Michael here to help us with. So let's start with some of those words. Michael, first of all, you're familiar with what I'm talking about, the constant throwing around of the heavy theological hammers at each other.
I am, and it's unfortunate that we have to have those discussions, but unfortunately that is the case with the situation in the church today. I will note that I do think that these terms are often conflated. In other words, they're being misused, and often they're used in the exact same way, as if there's really no difference between heresy, schism, apostasy.
Right.
And so they all effectively mean the same thing in common usage, ironically. And then what I've also noticed is that people tend to use these terms to mean, if you say something I don't like, that's heresy. Or if you say something that I think is not traditional, that's heresy, or apostasy. And so, I think it's pretty important for us to get these terms down. You mentioned their dissent, apostasy, schism, heresy. I think those are noteworthy to address. So let's maybe, if you want, we can kind of go through those. And
because I want to use them properly. Like if I call someone a heretic on Twitter, first of all, that's helpful to building up the kingdom of God. That usually really contributes when you call someone a heretic on Twitter. But what am I? Who would be the appropriate person to use that? What does it mean? What is a heretic?
Yeah. So heretic, again, kind of is often today used to just mean you said something that I think is erroneous, but actually it has a more technical sense.
Okay.
Even though way back in the day, maybe if you start opening up the church fathers, you'll see them use the term heresy a little different than we use it today. They used it a little bit more broadly. Today it has a very, very specific definition. I'll read it to you from the Catechism and then unpack it. This is from paragraph 2089. Which is also confirmed in the Code of Canon Law. It says, heresy is the obstinate post-baptismal denial of some truth which must be believed with divine and Catholic faith, or it's the obstinate doubt concerning the same. So what does that mean? Okay. Well, it's saying if somebody has been baptized and they're denying something that God has revealed, perhaps in sacred scripture, and that the church has confirmed this is a teaching that has been revealed by God. So it's been revealed by God, and the church confirms that it's revealed by God. Well, if you deny that after your baptism, that's heresy. But note, it has to be something that God has revealed and that the church confirms that God has revealed. Or it might not even just be a denial. It could be an obstinate doubt. Now, note the
Oh.
term obstinate. I mean, it's not like a fleeting doubt or something like that. This is something that is willful and is abiding. It's an obstinate, it's part of your will. You are actively doubting this and intending to doubt. So it's either a rejection or that obstinate doubt. That's heresy. So that means not all errors, not all theological errors are heresy. And it has to be something that, again, is revealed by God and confirmed by the church as something revealed by God. Something that has not necessarily been revealed by God,
Yeah.
or at least it's not clear that God has revealed this in divine revelation and the church hasn't issued some kind of solemn definition on it, that wouldn't necessarily be heresy. If someone were to deny such a teaching, it could be a lower grade of error. And in fact, there's a pretty wide scale of what we would call theological notes. And so there's a pretty long scale of categories to error. Heresy's at the very top. That's the worst possible kind of error.
So I can see like certain things, like if I denied the Trinity or the resurrection of Jesus or the, the Immaculate Conception of Mary, and I did so not in a, oh, I made a mistake way, somebody needs to correct me. No, you misunderstood. But in a way that's like, no, I don't believe that. Then, and I'm a baptized person, then that's heresy. But, okay, so let's say somebody, I don't know, let's pick a relatively minor council document, like Dignitatis Humanae or something. I don't think that the bishops got it wrong at the Second Vatican Council on their teaching on religious freedom. Now, that seems serious. I'm saying the bishops got it wrong in a council, but I'm not denying the Trinity. Like, do you see what I'm saying? So help me out. Am I a heretic or am I not a heretic?
So in the case of Dignitatis Humanae, we're talking about the question of religious liberty, which I think you and I had a show on that. So this is going to be something that's taught by the Second Vatican Council, an ecumenical council, with really, really high authority because it is an ecumenical council, but it is admittedly taught non-definitively. So it is not taught as dogma. And for something to be heretical, you do have to deny a dogma specifically. And so it has not been taught as dogma. So if you were to deny it, you would be in error, but you technically wouldn't be a heretic. And I also want to distinguish between what we can call formal heresy and material heresy. You could have a person who is in a state of material heresy ignorantly. What do I mean? Well, if I don't know that this is something revealed by God and I'm denying it, well, there's not necessarily culpability there unless I'm intentionally ignorant. It could just be that I'm ignorant and I'm not well catechized. In such a case, let's say there's somebody out there who denies the Immaculate Conception, but they don't know that the church teaches this. In that case, they're in a state of material heresy, but they wouldn't be what we would call a formal heretic unless they know better and they're obstinate in their rejection of that dogma. But if they're informed, they know better, and they're obstinately fighting against it, yeah, that's formal heresy. So, I mean, that could be that, somebody is in a state of material heresy and it's not necessarily something that is going to lead them to hell. I mean, not immediately speaking, because again, they may not be aware of such things. But then again, if they become aware, then there's a problem with their eternal destiny. Sure.
Okay, so that seems clear to me. Maybe after we take this quick break, we'll ask then, well, what's the difference between that and apostasy? What's the difference between those two and schism? Because as you said, a lot of these things are I think most people, or maybe not most people, but many people don't seem to know there even is a difference between apostasy and heresy. So we'll do that when we come back?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And then we'll get some calls, 888-318-7884. Michael Lofton, our guest, right back with more on these big theological accusation words we use. What do they mean? When is the appropriate time to use them? We'll do all that right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Miss a show? Make sure to catch up by downloading the podcast, available online at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
We should pray because prayer is conversation with God, and conversation is the only way to build a relationship. We need that relationship with God. We should pray and talk with God about what's on our hearts, what's on our minds, what's active in our lives, the joys we have. We should share all of these with God. Prayer is conversation, and conversation is the only way to build a relationship with God. It's the most important relationship. All of our other relationships depend on this one.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Michael Lofton is our guest. You should check out his work at Reason and Theology. You really should. It's just top-notch work that he does over there at Reason and Theology. But, Michael, I feel like sometimes, like we can explain all these terms, but sometimes I almost feel like we need to explain to people a matter of style, which is correcting someone in an understated way can actually be more effective than hitting them with the biggest sledgehammer you can find. Like if you're always hitting people with sledgehammers, like at a certain point, well, I mean, I guess if you're actually hitting them with sledgehammers, they're not going to tune you out. But I mean, the metaphorical sledgehammer, like there is this thing too about calm down, speak with a bit of reserve, and you might actually be more effective in your communication.
Yeah, I've noticed that if you are a little bit more reserved in some situations, you may actually gain a person's attention. Then, it kind of opens a door for you to be able to correct them in a gentle way. It just kind of depends on the person and their disposition, which would require you to kind of know that person and their temperament and what they'll respond to. In some cases, you may know a person who would respond very well to aggressive language, whereas there might be somebody else who their temperament wouldn't receive that well. Maybe
that's a good point.
In that case, that wouldn't be prudent.
All right, so you helped us with a heretic, and you also pointed out that a lot of times people are using these words basically to say, "You're wrong. I disagree with you." So if that's the case, okay, but it is important to know that there are technical definitions to these things. So what's the difference between a heretic and an apostate?
Yeah, an apostate. So that's specifically going to be the total repudiation of the Christian faith. So if somebody is a Christian and they become a Muslim, that would be a total repudiation of the Christian faith. Or if they're a Christian and they become an atheist, they're totally repudiating the Christian faith. Whereas maybe if you have somebody who is a Catholic who becomes a Protestant, some people will call that apostasy. Very technically, that's not apostasy because they still are maintaining the Christian faith, although in a heretical and even schismatic form. But they haven't totally repudiated the Christian faith. They presumably still believe that Jesus is the Messiah, that Jesus is fully divine and fully man, the Trinity, those things. So in that case, somebody who goes from Catholicism to Protestantism, they might be guilty of the sin of heresy and also schism, but not necessarily apostasy.
So apostasy is the big one. That's
the worst one.
Yeah, I've totally denied the. So if someone says I'm a Christian, I just don't believe in the resurrection of Jesus. That's odd to me, but that person is not an apostate.
Well, now in that particular case, I don't think you can maintain Christianity at all without the resurrection because there's what's called the hierarchy of truths, and that is there's this order of teachings that other teachings are built upon. If the resurrection goes, the entire Christian faith goes. So it's a little different than maybe, say, denying the Immaculate Conception. If you deny the Immaculate Conception, you might still maintain the Trinity or the divinity of Jesus.
Right.
But you deny the resurrection, you've denied the entire foundation for the Christian faith. I don't see how you could still call whatever you believe at that point Christianity. Yeah. So in the case specifically of the resurrection, I do think that does lead to total apostasy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and would the Trinity? It would seem to me that the Trinity would be one of those things.
Yeah, it's also pretty high in the hierarchy of truths. In fact, if you look at Thomas Aquinas, he's going to say the two doctrines that are really just right there at the top are going to be the Trinity and the Incarnation. And upon those, all of the other teachings of the church really rest.
I've got some folks who want to ask you some questions. Sure. I've still got some, but I'd like to let some callers in. Aaron's in Michigan watching on YouTube. Aaron, thank you very much for the call. Go ahead with your question.
Hi. I actually have a two-parter on this, actually. What is schism, and how do you know if you've fallen into it?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm glad you asked it because that was the next one that we were going to address, schism. So schism is going to be the refusal of submission to the Roman pontiff or communion with the members subject to him. So that would be the bishops, the College of Bishops. So if you are refusing to submit to the Pope or the bishops in communion with him, whenever they're exercising their lawful authority, and you're doing this in a very significant and obstinate way, that is going to be schism. So one instance that we can see this play out is going to be the rule of the Roman pontiff in the Code of Canon Law that if a bishop is going to ordain another bishop, it does have to, in most cases, receive the confirmation and approbation of Rome. So a bishop generally can't just go and ordain whoever he wants, in most cases. They have to get permission from the Holy See. Well, if a bishop were to go out and start ordaining bishops without the permission, and in fact, even with the prohibition of the Pope, they're in a state of schism, because here the Pope has, told them they cannot do this, and they're expressly going against the Pope's lawful authority. That would be schism. Or leaving communion with the Roman pontiff, perhaps a Catholic who leaves the Catholic Church for Eastern Orthodoxy. That would be also a state of schism. Now, I'm not judging a person's culpability here. There's certainly a difference between what we would call, somebody who's in a state of formal schism versus a material state of schism. So we could certainly have that discussion in these cases of a person who leaves to Eastern Orthodoxy, but nonetheless, objectively speaking, that would still be schism because it's a refusal of submission to the Roman pontiff because this individual is no longer in communion with the Roman pontiff. And thus they are operating and acting outside of his authority. So how do you know? Well, are you in communion with a bishop who's in communion with the Pope? If the answer is no to that, well, that's one good way to know that you're in schism.
Aaron, does that make sense to you? Oh, hang on, Aaron. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Does that make sense to you, Aaron?
Yeah, because you know my story, I think.
Yeah.
I'm the one that left the Catholic Church for the sedevacantist movement.
Yeah.
So that would be schism then.
Yes.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And especially in the case of sedevacantism, because do you have a bishop?
They do have a bishop.
Okay. But that bishop is not in communion with the Bishop of Rome because he doesn't believe that the Bishop of Rome actually is right now. Correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So that still would be a state of schism. Now, that's not imputing any kind of culpability to you personally. I'm not here to judge you, and only God can ultimately determine those things. But just, objectively speaking, the state in which you're in and the communion in which you're in would be in a state of schism, yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure because I'm actually going to come back and go to confession tomorrow. And I just want to make sure that I was thinking right.
And that's exactly what you would do. You would just simply go to confession to a Catholic priest who's in communion with the Pope and just confess the sin of schism. And if you were, already assuming you're Catholic, you would be received right back into the Catholic Church.
Okay.
Aaron, what a joyful day for us. Thank you very much for calling and sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Praise God, brother. I look forward to talking to you again.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Wow. And tomorrow.
Always happy to hear that.
I know, kind of stunned. What a beautiful, thing. I'm coming home. When someone says that to you, I'm coming home. Wow. Reminder to everybody: Saturday's a big day for confession. That's a reminder from Aaron. So if you haven't been for a while, hey, maybe tomorrow get up a little early, go to confession. 888-318-7884 is the number. We're talking about all these big words that we throw around. Heresy we've dealt with, apostasy. We've dealt with schism. We've dealt with, sounds like a word that Snoop Dogg made up, but it's actually a very serious thing, schism. Sorry, Michael, it just does. I'm sorry. Dissent. How about that? What's dissent?
Yeah, so that's going to be, it could have a pretty wide range. It's going to be an opposition to lawful authority, perhaps in matters of teachings or discipline. But here we're talking broadly speaking. It could be specific. It could be opposition to a dogma. That would be heresy. But as I mentioned earlier, there's also opposition to lower grades of teachings that aren't dogmatic in nature. They're lower in nature. So opposing them is lower than heresy. Those would also fall into the category of dissent, or even disciplinary decisions of the Pope that one is required to follow. Disciplinary decisions of the Pope or an ecumenical council, really. If one is opposing those, they're in dissent. And so you can be in dissent even against something that's not a teaching, but is more a rule and regulation.
So I don't want to get too specific about it, but I just want to ask you about the way that I see people dissent. At least it seems like dissent to me, and you tell me.
Yeah.
But they'll say something like, well, I know that the church teaches, this on, let's say, gay marriage, okay? But, and they sincerely believe this. They'll say, but, the church will get with the times eventually. So that means they don't accept what the church teaches today because they're assuming that the church will reform its teaching. Clearly they're wrong about that, but they don't. But is that dissent? What is that person doing?
There's definitely an element of dissent there in the situation that you described. And so when it comes to dissent, it can also be expressed in different ways, but it's usually something that's expressed publicly, although it could be just purely internal.
Oh, I see.
But I want to distinguish between dissent and maybe a lack of assent. There is a distinction here. A lack of assent is I'm failing to accept the teaching of the church, but perhaps I just keep that to myself, as opposed to dissent where I'm actually publicly opposing the teaching of the church. Now, it doesn't always have to be public because you could dissent in your heart. But I do want to distinguish between that and maybe somebody who they're struggling with the teaching of the church. They're struggling to assent to it, but they're not opposed to accepting it. They're just struggling with it. That would be somebody who fails to give assent, but they're not yet in dissent.
Yeah, they're not withholding assent. They just can't get there.
Yeah, they're not deliberately trying to oppose the church. They're still struggling with it. They're still working through it. That wouldn't necessarily be dissent. It would become dissent if they're now willfully, okay, I'm not going to accept this teaching of the church.
I'm so glad you said that, because I think a lot of people struggle with the fact that they struggle. Like, am I a heretic? Am I an apostate? And what am I doing? Because I can't accept what the church, or I haven't been able to accept what the church teaches on ordination or on a moral issue or something like that. Or for many people, it's the Marian issues, especially among our Protestant brothers and sisters trying to come into the church. They want to, but I can't get there with you on Mary. They'll just say that.
Yeah, in those cases, it may not always be dissent. Like the case of women's ordination that you brought up. I mean, the church is very clear that you can't have women ordained to the priesthood or the episcopate. But let's say there's a person out there who they're willing to accept that, but they haven't yet reached that because they're still working through, well, why did the church teach this? And does it actually have the authority to teach this? And so they're still kind of working through those questions. That's not yet dissent. And the church is certainly willing to accompany those people and walk with them and help them. But it does become a problem when they say, okay, well, you know what? I'm just not going to accept this, period. I will not accept this no matter what the church says. I don't care if it claims to have authority from Jesus, and I don't care what its reasons are. I'm not going to accept it. Now we're crossing the line into something that is problematic, and that is dissent.
Got it. 888-318-7884, 888-31-TRUTH. Let's go to Walt in Spring City, Pennsylvania, listening on EWTN. Walt, thanks very much for the call. Go ahead with your question for Michael.
I appreciate you doing this. There are a couple of high-profile people who have now been promoted and involved with this synod and synodality that teach that homosexual acts can be loving. What would you call such a person?
Walt, thank you so much for the question, and you got it out really quick, too, before the break, because I didn't look at the clock very well. So can you just hang on through the break, and then we'll get an answer for you?
Certainly.
Okay, thank you, Walt. Right back with Michael Lofton, and we're talking about all the big bad words we throw at each other. Heretic, apostate, schismatic. What do they mean? When are they appropriate? Are you ready to defend your faith in a world of unbelief? Join us at the 9th Annual Catholic Answers Apologetics Conference. This year's theme, I Believe in God, and it'll help you provide clear and charitable answers to atheism, agnosticism, and plain old indifference. Don't miss what promises to be the event of the season. Join us in San Diego from September 21st through 24th as we welcome our special guest, Dr. Scott Hahn, and an all-star lineup of great Catholic speakers. Spend quality time with your favorite Catholic Answers apologists and enjoy 4 days of fun, fellowship, and adoration of the Almighty. Seats are still available, but they're going fast. Visit CatholicAnswersConference.com or call 888-291-8000 to register. Enter promo code EARLY and save $50. That's CatholicAnswersConference.com.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity. In the early church was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. We like throwing these terms around at one another. And I say it that way. I don't mean to be flip about it. It's tough times in the Catholic Church. It is very hard to get your bearings, to stay on those bearings, to keep the truth in sight and to hold it charitably. It's very hard. So I'm not trying to be flip about it, but it is the case that, especially with the advent of social media and all the other things that go on social media, one of the things that Catholics do is use really harsh words with one another, including heretic, apostate, schismatic, dissenter. We've done all of those. And Walt is in Pennsylvania and has a question for you about how do you classify there's people, he said, who were promoted to the synod and synodality. Mm-hmm. But they publicly affirm homosexual acts as moral, or they assert that homosexual acts are moral, or even are good. I guess that's the same thing. So what do you call that kind of person? Is what Walt is asking.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll say a couple of things here. I mean, I have gone into this in long-term, long-form shows on my own channel, so one can certainly check those out. But I'll give kind of a brief answer here. And by the way, for those who are not familiar, the Synod on Synodality is not like a church council or anything like that. It doesn't have any teaching authority in the church. It's an advisory body to the Pope. So it's literally just a bunch of group of people who come to advise the Pope, and the Pope can either take what they advise or dismiss it, take it or leave it. But yeah, okay. Well, what do we do with maybe somebody in the church who is saying that same-sex acts are moral and there's nothing wrong with them? Would that be heresy? I do think that would constitute heresy, because I do think it's explicit in Scripture that same-sex acts are immoral, and so I don't think that there's any way that one could try to redeem that kind of behavior and say that it's not sinful, or that it's not something that God has revealed. And I'll also say, not only is it something God has revealed would be immoral, but again, the church has confirmed that through its ordinary and universal magisterium. So in other words, the bishops constantly affirming these things throughout the ages. So I do think that would constitute a level of heresy for a person to, obstinately deny the church's teaching here. Now, whether or not a person is actually doing that is a different question. There are some people who are being accused of denying the church's teaching here, but they're not actually, in some cases, not always denying it, but there might be other issues with them.
Walt, did that address what you needed addressed?
Yeah, I think that they're mostly denying it, especially the Relator General of the Synod and Synodality. He's pretty much said that in public. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yep, thank you. I can't remember who said what, but I have a vague recollection of what Walt is talking about. Okay, Walt, thanks very much. Michael, you've been dealing with some of this at Reason and Theology and in the work that you do in trying to clarify this. Are people receptive to hearing, hey, you use the word heretic in this way, that's actually not what it means, or do you find that people are resistant to you clarifying this for them?
Some are receptive and some are very hostile. But I haven't seen a person that was really able to show me where I was wrong theologically.
Yeah.
Usually those who are hostile to, what I've demonstrated is it's more from an emotional perspective, or it's emotions and they have been misinformed about a lot of things. So perhaps they've heard somebody say, well, Pope Francis teaches this, or so-and-so said that. And in fact, they're going based on what so-and-so said rather than what maybe Francis or somebody else has actually said. And so sometimes that's part of, why some people can be very, very hostile and opposed.
Yeah. And you can oppose a pope without being a schismatic. Like, people have done that. They say, I don't like this pope. I don't like the way you can do that. Sure. Like you don't have to drop the hammer, in other words, well, let me ask you this though, in a practical sense, is it possible for a pope to be a heretic?
So if we're maybe saying a pope who is maintains material heresy, or is in a state of material heresy, I would say the answer is yes. And so material heresy is just that the person is misinformed and what they hold to does oppose a doctrine, but they're unaware that it's opposed to, I'm sorry, I should have said a dogma, not necessarily a doctrine. What they hold to is opposed to a dogma, but they don't necessarily know that. They're not obstinately, and willfully and knowingly opposing it. So maybe if somebody came and corrected them and showed them, hey, the church does dogmatically teach this, a person who is in that position of material heresy, they have a choice at that point. They can either assent to what the church teaches, or they can now start to willfully and knowingly oppose it. Now, if they continue to then willfully and knowingly oppose it, they're now a formal heretic, as opposed to somebody who is in a state of material heresy. Could a pope be a formal heretic? I don't believe so. And in the cases that people have tried to demonstrate, maybe the cases of Honorius don't stand, in my opinion, especially in the case of Honorius. And I think that there are some things that the Holy Spirit has promised to us that would protect a pope from being a formal heretic. But again, could a pope be misinformed and in a state of material heresy, and even express that vocally, that heresy, express it vocally, not as pope, but just kind of in his private capacity, maybe on an airplane interview or something like that? You could have a pope that does that. You could have a pope who gives an interview on an airplane and says something heretical and doesn't know better.
Yeah.
Well, that's possible.
I have to say, though, I've said heretical things. I actually have said heretical things on the air I just made a mistake. So I'm not on an airplane. It's just, I mean, this literally happened one time. Jimmy Akin said to me, is St. Joseph Jesus' biological father? And I said, yeah. And then I wasn't thinking what I was saying. And he goes, Sai, is St. Joseph and I was like, yes, Jimmy. I said yes. And I was like, move on, like to the next. And then he's like, dude. What? And I was like, oh, biological. I'd missed the word biological. So I didn't mean to deny the teaching of the virgin birth, but so I guess
that's a perfect example.
Yeah.
And when you were corrected on it, you realized, oh no, I wasn't actually
had to be corrected twice.
That. And so I didn't really mean that. I mean, I just wasn't thinking. And so that's a perfect example. A pope could make the same mistake.
I gotcha.
And in that sense, could be a heretic, but only in a material sense.
Let me ask you about one other word, because we're doing all these big words. Sedevacantists, what does it mean? What would I have to do to be a sedevacantist?
Yeah, it's a fancy Latin term. It means the seat of the Pope is empty. In other words, there is no Pope. So the chair of St. Peter is empty. So if you were to say there is no Pope right now, when there clearly is, that is sedevacantist, or a sedevacantist. That is a state of sedevacante. Now, interestingly enough, when the Pope dies, we're all sedevacantists, right? Yeah, right. until the next Pope is elected, we're all sedevacantists. But right now, there is a Pope right now who sits on the throne of St. Peter, and so if you were to deny that, you would be a sedevacantist. Yeah.
I got you. Okay, let's go to Fadi here in San Diego, watching on YouTube. Fadi, thank you very much for your call and for your patience. Go ahead with your question for Michael Lofton.
Hey, Michael, how you doing?
Hi.
So my question is, let's say somebody takes all the distinctions you've spoken about, like what's a heretic, what's a schismatic, et cetera, and I want to use them correctly to out of charity, tell a friend basically they're heretics. What's the best approach to do it in charity? That way we don't become just accusing people and those words right in there.
Yeah. So in other words, when is it appropriate for a layman to judge somebody and determine that they're a heretic and express that? Is that the question?
Sure. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I would be very, very hesitant to throw out that term. I mean, is it possible for a layman to make that determination and even tell a person, this is heresy or this person is a heretic? It is possible, but you need to make sure you know what you're talking about. Make sure you know what dogma they're actually denying and that they really are denying it, and there's not a misunderstanding. There's not some nuance going on there. And so in most cases, since one may not know those things, I would really hesitate to call a person a heretic, because that's a huge accusation. And if you've falsely accused them of that could be a very grave sin to publicly accuse somebody of such a major issue. And it turns out maybe you're wrong. That could certainly be grave matter, especially if you're damaging their reputation and they're not a heretic. So could a layman in theory do this? Yeah, a layman can determine what is opposed to a dogma, but you need to just make sure you really know what you're talking about, and that it's even profitable for you to say that. In some cases, you might know that this is heresy, but you just know that it's not going to be profitable for me to be the one who says it.
Gotcha. And I got a follow-up question, if that's possible. So you mentioned the distinction between formal versus material heresy, and you focus a lot on the idea of you have to you have to know that's a heresy. The church says it's a heresy, and you just continue denying it. But I don't know. For me, it's hard to see somebody in that state. I feel like most people are just really don't believe in things. Not they're like you said, in a state of rejection, denying the faith. So I don't know, it seems like everybody is in a sense justified, because everybody just believes what they're saying. I mean, think of the worst heretic, what they're saying was the truth. So in a sense, is it even a formal heretic? In that regard?
Yeah. I do think that I do think that there are. I mean, first of all, those that the church has judged to be formal heretics, we would presume the church was right about them, unless there's something just major to overturn that. We would presume they're right. So certainly in those cases. But yeah, no, I've met people who know that the church teaches X dogmatically, and they knowingly and willingly and obstinately reject it. I've met people who are formal heretics. But I will note, a lot of people don't meet that description. They're more in just a state of material heresy. And really, if they knew that God expected them and required them to maintain this, they probably would. And so I would say, okay, maybe we're a little too quick to throw out the accusation of a formal heretic in some cases, but I certainly think it's possible.
Yep.
I've seen it.
Because there's doctrine. Yeah. And since there's doctrine, there can be people who obstinately reject that doctrine or dogma. Yeah.
I've seen it.
Fadi, thanks very much. Got to take a quick break where we'll be right back with more with Michael Lofton on Catholic Answers Live.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and His gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
If you've never been to EWTN's free family celebration, this is your year. Your EWTN family is waiting for you where it all began in Birmingham, Alabama. Join us Saturday, August 26th as we celebrate Mother Angelica's love for the Eucharist and mark the centennial year of Mother's birth. For more information on this free event, visit EWTN.com/family celebration. We want to see you there.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Delighted because Michael Lofton is here with us on a Friday afternoon. Michael, the founder, the proprietor, the host at Reason and Theology. Check it out at reasonandtheology.com, or just go to your YouTube machine and look for Reason and Theology. See all kinds of really intelligent and charitable discussion over there. And we're always so happy when Michael's here on the air with us. And you've been taking a little bit of heat, Michael, because you've clarified some of these terms with people who didn't want them clarified. But there is a lot of heat out there. I mean, in some cases, much more heat than light in the use of some of these words. But we're talking about the big, tough words that people throw at each other as Catholics: heretic, apostate, dissenter, schismatic, sedevacantists. Are there any other words we should get to before I go back to the phones, or have we covered all the big bad
One more.
ones?
Incredulity. That would be to deny something that God has revealed, but it hasn't necessarily yet been confirmed by the church as something that God has revealed, maybe in a solemn definition. I'll give you an example. Scripture, God reveals that the Holy Family fled to Egypt, but are there any solemn definitions of the church where the church has solemnly defined? No.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's no need. It's so explicit in Scripture. There's really no need for the church to define such a thing. But if a person were to deny that the Holy Family fled to Egypt, I think that, that's incredulity right there. So it's a little different than heresy. Heresy is going to be something God has revealed, and the church has confirmed it as something that God has revealed. But some might argue, but the church has confirmed that the Word of God
that's what I was going to say.
is revealed. Yeah. Sure, kind of in an indirect way, right? But what if they say, well, I don't believe that verse is part of Scripture or something like that? So
I wonder if
go ahead.
I wonder if I have incredulity, or what do I have in this case? Because it has nothing to do with Scripture. It has to do with, there are some claims of apparitions that are, in some cases, not generally accepted, but they're accepted by a lot of people, where I think the bishop got it wrong. And I'm not talking about I'm not talking about Lourdes. I'm not talking about Fatima, Our Lady of Guadalupe.
Sure.
But that generally have the approval of their bishop. And I have my grave doubts about them.
You're not obligated to believe those things. And first of all, we're not even talking about things now that God has revealed in public revelation. Now we're talking about private revelation. So it's not in the category of incredulity or heresy, and you're not obliged to assent to those things. I mean, you can respect the judgment of the bishop while disagreeing with the bishop on some of those things.
Okay.
So yeah, no, that's not an issue.
Okay. All right. Man, I hope I make it through this hour with you, and I'm still officially Catholic. So far, I think I'm passing all the tests. But Michael, another Michael in Texas, listening on Catholic.com. We're glad you're here, Michael. Go ahead with your question for Michael Lofton.
Yeah. Well, first of all, good evening, gentlemen. I'm enjoying this discussion.
Thank you.
So, I think you've already answered. I guess my first question, which is it possible for a pope to be, a heretic? And the answer which you gave is effectively no.
Not a formal heretic.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yes, yeah. Well, a formal meaning with full knowledge.
Right.
Yeah, obstinately.
Yeah, I would argue you cannot have such a thing. Right.
Okay. And if he was an apostate, he would have left the church, so he can't be an apostate, right?
Yeah, right. Not a pope at that point. So yeah.
yeah, right. Now, is it possible for him to be a dissenter or schismatic?
So, historically, I say historically here, maybe in the last 500 years, I have seen some theologians put forward the notion that a pope could be a schismatic. But whenever I look at them in context, they're defining the term schism very broadly, and which just effectively means dissent for them. But if you look at the way we define schism today, it's a refusal of submission to the Roman pontiff. So can a pope refuse to submit to himself as the pope? No, that doesn't make any sense. So in the narrow way in which we're defining the term schism today, no, you cannot have a pope who's schismatic. But the more broader question, could he be in dissent? I do think that a pope in some maybe lower areas of theology, maybe not dogma, but in some lower areas of theology, perhaps non-definitive teachings of the church, could be opposed to some of those non-definitive teachings, and that wouldn't necessarily encroach on any of the promises that God has given to us on the indefectibility of the teaching office of the papacy. So I could see it in some qualified sense and very low categories of theology, but not it. I can't see a pope dissenting from dogma or something like that. And especially when we talk about dissent, we're talking about knowledgeable, willful opposition to something. I don't see that happening with the Pope. No, because if you especially, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, for example, let's just pick one that comes up every once in a while, and that is that question of could women be ordained as priests? Now that's taught as dogma that it's only men, right?
It's definitively taught in Ordinatio Sacerdotalis. Yeah. So
if a pope were to come out and say we can change that, what would that be? And I'm not saying that about any particular pope. This is a hypothetical.
Yeah, it could be, first of all, it could be that the Pope is ignorant, maybe, of Ordinatio Sacerdotalis, which would be a shame, because I don't know how one could be a Pope and not know these things, but I suppose it could happen. So I would want to distinguish between maybe a Pope who's just unaware of what the Church has said on these things, as opposed to he is aware and he's now publicly dissenting from them. I don't think that you are going to have that case, and what I would present to you among various pieces of evidence for that is, if you look at the Relatio document of the First Vatican Council, where they're discussing the issue of papal infallibility, Bishop Gasser gave a speech to the bishops in what's called a Relatio. He gave a speech to the bishops before they voted on papal infallibility. And in there he notes, if you have the Holy See, that is a see of pestilence, that is a see that is, going rogue and is opposing doctrine and is, fighting against the traditions of the church, you no longer have the indefectibility of the Roman See, which is contrary to all kinds of teachings in the Catholic Church, including ecumenical councils. So here he's going to note, you can't have a pope who is just reigning, on the throne of St. Peter, but is just terrorizing the faithful and opposing traditions and opposing dogma. He's going to say, you can't have that. And the fathers of the First Vatican Council seem to accept what Bishop Gasser was saying there. So I would present that as evidence that no, you can never have a pope who's in that kind of dissent.
Michael, I'm going to leave it there because I want to get as many on as I can with our guest, Michael Lofton. I'm going to go to Nashville, Tennessee, where Thomas is listening on EWTN. Thomas, if you could be kind of quick with your question, we'll have time for Michael to give you an answer.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me. A lot of these calls are kind of right where I was at. I want to ask about what we should think about Pope Francis. I recognize him as the Pope, but recently it seems like there's been a string of things against him I have a huge question about, and I'm really concerned about. And I love Bishop Strickland. I'm reading his book right now, Light and Leaven, and he's going against him. He's had Bill Clinton, Pelosi, George Soros, the son of the Vatican, this new doctrine of faith, this new archbishop is very questionable. This designer, this artist had a picture of Jesus in urine. These people he's associating with, it's very disturbing, and I don't know what to think about him anymore. I'm kind of confused.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Thomas.
Yeah, every one of those instances I've recently addressed on my show, but I'll give you a short answer here. I've had Bishop Strickland on my show. I think he's a man who loves Jesus. I think he's a good person. And I think that he wants to be faithful to Christ. I will point out that he did sign a document publicly condemning the Pope as a heretic, or as teaching heresy, I should say. He signed a document saying that Pope Francis taught heresy in Desiderio Desideravi. And I don't think that was the right move on his part. And so that could account for some of the, for the investigation that was going on in his diocese recently, the apostolic visitation that you're referring to. So I would take that into account. But again, that being said, I do think that he loves Jesus and he wants to do the right thing. But yeah, all these other issues, I would point Pope Francis and note in these cases, it's not that he's somehow condoning behavior of some of those figures that he has an audience with. You mentioned an artist who had a very sacrilegious work of art recently, and Pope Francis invited him and 200 other artists to the Vatican for a talk that he had. In that case, Pope Francis never endorsed his sacrilegious work of art. It was very clear in the case of the Vatican. They said that particular artist was invited to form and establish a dialogue with him, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think that it's good for us to dialogue and call back to the faith those who are erring and doing things that are in error or wrong. So I think that that's effectively what Pope Francis was doing there. I wouldn't attribute to him that he's somehow endorsing that person's sacrilegious work of art. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to go back to Thomas and see what he thought. Mm-hmm. All right, Thomas, go ahead.
Yeah, I could see a lot of that, but I'm just the synod too. Can you explain? I know you probably talked about it a little bit, but just having James Martin there, and it almost does seem like an endorsement of what he's doing, though.
And I did go over that one in detail. So I want you to, if you can, check out on my channel later on the video that I did with Pope Francis and James Martin. But the short answer here is going to be, I'm not exactly sure how much Pope Francis is aware of the details surrounding some of the things that James Martin has said. I don't know how much he's being advised because he's already said that he's not on social media. So I'm not exactly sure what his advisors are telling him. I do know this: when you look at a lot of the public material of James Martin, his platform is going to be, well, I'm going to focus on telling people about the love of Jesus and that God loves people who are struggling with these particular acts and that they're created in the image of God. And that's good, but I have seen that James Martin elsewhere on social media will go further than that and say some other things that are problematic. And I'm not so sure that Pope Francis is aware of some of those things. For all I know, he's just saying the most prominent things that James Martin talks about, and that is bringing the love of Jesus to people, telling people they're created in God's image and likeness, and that God doesn't hate them. So it could be that he's misled to some extent.
So where can Thomas see your recent work? Just go to reasonandtheology.com or YouTube channel?
On YouTube, yeah, Reason and Theology on YouTube.
Okay, Thomas, I hope that's helpful to you. Hey, I'm sorry to a couple callers we weren't able to get to. We ran out of time, but maybe we'll do this again because there was clearly a lot of interest in this. Michael Lofton, thanks. Really enjoyed the hour.
Thanks for having me.
That does it for us today. If you got a spare one, offer a prayer for Edgar and Lena, who got married yesterday. Edgar, of course, screens the calls here on a daily basis, and he also is our podcast producer. And that'll do it for us. We'll see you next time, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.